So we are back on the Porsche Cayenne and it's engine rebuild time. And we'll start off by having a look at the mountain of parts that I had to order. First up, we've got the head gasket set along with all the seals that we're going to need for rebuilding the top end. We've got the exhaust valves that will replace the bent ones. And we've got a new set of piston rings for all 6 pistons. And then we have the bearings that we can rebuild the bottom end for the crankshaft and the com rods. And we've got some sealant that we'll use for putting the engine back together along with some assembly lube. And we've got 6 new spark plugs. Then we've got the bolts, which is used for the com rods. And we've got a couple of seals that we use for the crankshaft on both ends. And the important one is a new kit for the timing chain. Then along with that, we've also got some new bolts for the head, as they always need to be replaced. And down here we've got a bunch of other bolts that we're going to use for the crankshaft. And I've got a new thermostat and temperature sensor. And then we've got a water pump. So that's it for all the engine parts. And here we just got some additional bits for the air suspension, which is the dust covers, which I'll be replacing at a later stage. So right, let's now crack on with the engine rebuild. So I think it's true when they say you spend most of your time cleaning when you're rebuilding the engine. And here I've made a start on the cylinder head. That's already looking a lot better than it did. And here's the upper timing chain cover, again with all the burnt oil removed from the inside. And here's the lower crank cover, again looking quite good. And here's the replacement cover for the timing chain that I had to buy, as the other one was destroyed. And we have a look at the sump again. That's looking a lot better with all the crap removed. And here are some of the products I was using to clean it. So we've got this heavy duty degreaser that I got from Screwfix for about £12. And then we've got good old petrol for some of the burnt on carbon. And I've also been trying this gunk engine degreaser, which seems to work quite well. And last but not least, we've got the rocker cover just under here, which again on the inside has been nicely cleaned up. So yeah, looking almost brand new. So we're going to start with rebuilding the cylinder head, and here we've got a valve grinding kit that we're going to use to help seat the new valves that we bought for the exhaust side. And here's one, all nice and shiny. And I've also used some Scotch-Brite and WD-40 with the drill just to sort of polish up the intake valves, and they're looking much better. So here's a clip of me grinding one of the valves. And as you can see, it's quite a slow, laborious task, especially when you need to do it 24 times like on this engine. I'm doing it by hand rather than a drill because I just wanted to get more of a feel for when it was seated correctly. So if I just carefully pull this one out and clean it up, what we're looking for here is a nice kind of even dull surface on both the valve seat and the valve itself. If I can get the camera to focus properly. No. Let's clean it up a bit more. Okay, there you go. So yeah, hopefully you can see there. Yeah, it's looking pretty good on this new valve. So yeah, that's basically one down and just the rest to do. So next up, we're going to install new valve seals, and I bought this useful kit off Amazon. It comes with some pliers that you can use for removing the old ones. And then we've also got this additional tool which you can use with these different adapters for the different sizes of valve seals that you've got, and then you can just insert the new seal in like that and then just tap it into place. So yeah, here's a clip of me just removing one of the old valve seals. As you can see, the long nose pliers come in very useful here, and you just sort of give it a twist and a bit of a pull, and then eventually it should pop out like so. And you can see a bunch of other ones that I've already removed. So with all of the old seals removed, we can now install the new ones, and we simply just insert it onto the end of this tool here, and then the tool goes down into the valve guide, and then we can just use a hammer just to kind of lightly tap it into position, and then you should feel when it's correctly seated and doesn't want to go down any further. And here are all the new valve seals fitted, meaning we can now get ready to put the valves in. And here are all the valves inserted into their correct positions, as obviously they've been ground individually. And next we're going to do the springs. So here we've got the spring compressor installed on one of the valves, and I'm going to use some assembly lube just on the collets, just to kind of help them stick to the top of the valve when we install it. So yeah, this can be a bit fiddly, so I'm just going to use a screwdriver here just to insert them in, making sure they're the right way around. And as you can see, it can be a bit of a faff, so you just need to persevere, and eventually, yep, you should have it installed, and then we can just loosen the valve spring compressor like so, and then hopefully that's another spring installed on one of the valves. So here I'm using a bit of an old school method just to see if any of the valves are leaking by putting some water into the tops of the cylinders and seeing if there's any leakage into the intake or exhaust ports, which doesn't appear to be. So far so good. So just another final check on the cylinder head, and we're going to use some compressed air and just blast that into the in and exhaust ports to see if there are any bubbles coming out, which there doesn't appear to be, so that's good news. I don't have anything fancy like a vacuum tester, so hopefully this will do the job. And that's pretty much the rebuild of the cylinder head done. The only thing left to do will be to clean up the surface, as you can see. So yeah, we can now move on to the rest of the engine. So here's the engine block, and we've just been giving it a good clean. And I've been using this drill with a wire brush just to get rid of all of the loose rust and paint that are flaking off. And in order to get rid of all the other sort of grime and oil and crap, I've just been using this heavy duty degreaser, which does the job quite nicely. So now that we've got the engine block pretty clean, I'm now just going to go and mask off the areas where I don't want to get paint on. So here you can see I've just used masking tape just to cover up all of the bolt holes, just to make sure that we don't get paint in the thread. And in order to paint the engine block, we're going to use this stuff here, which is Granville Cylinder Black Satin Finish, which apparently does quite a nice job and is a high temperature paint. So yeah, we'll come back later and see how it looks. So we're going to move on to the cylinders now, and I've opted just to do a deglaze, as the cylinders themselves look alright, so I don't think they require a full hone. So here I am just using the deglazing tool, so I've got it attached to an electric drill, and I'm just going to use some WD-40 here just to keep it lubricated to make sure it doesn't dry out. So yeah, I'll just switch the drill on at a very slow speed and then just move it up and down slowly. So here's a little look after we've deglazed the cylinders, and we're trying to get a nice cross-hatching effect to help the new rings bed in once the pistons are installed. So looking a bit closer, you can see there are some dark spots in some of the cylinders, like here, for example. Even though it kind of looks bad, you can't actually feel it. The only imperfection I could find was here in this cylinder, where there is a slight mark, but hopefully that won't cause too many problems. So now that the deglazing's done, we're going to use a bore gauge just to double check that all of the cylinders are within spec. So I've got the calipers set to 84 millimeters, and I've just set the dial here, and we'll be using 0 as our reference point. So as you can see here, I'm just going to measure at 3 points, the top, middle and the bottom. And as you can see on screen, that's the wear limit of each of the cylinders. And what you can see here is at the point where the needle deflects past 0 is giving us the diameter. So obviously we don't want that going too much past 0, otherwise that would indicate that we're probably over the wear limit. But so far it looks like it's within spec. And also we're going to measure it in the other direction, just to make sure we've got the full set of readings again from the top, middle and the bottom of the cylinder. So here are the results for all 6 cylinders, and as you can see it's all measured within spec. The only thing you'll notice is that cylinders 1 and 2 on the x-axis, which runs in line with the crank, are getting close to the limit, but still within acceptable amount of wear. And also interestingly is generally the y-axis, which is the transverse at 90 degrees to the crank, appear to be wearing slightly less, which is interesting, but that's not exactly the same across all cylinders. But either way, all the measurements seem okay, so we should be okay to proceed with using this block. So next up, we're going to clean up the surface of the cylinder head for the new head gasket, and we're using this Loctite gasket remover along with a scraper with a carbide tip and some Scotch-Brite. And I'm using those specifically as they shouldn't scratch the surface. So we'll start off just by liberally spraying the gasket remover all over the top of the block, and then just letting that soak in for a few minutes before we'll go in with the scraper and the Scotch-Brite to lift off any of the remaining gaskets. And once that's done, we'll come back and have a look at the results. So here's a look at the engine block after we've repainted it and also deglazed the cylinders and cleaned up the surface for the head gasket. I think you'll agree it now looks a lot better than it did when we started. So we'll turn our attention onto the crankshaft now, and it seems to still be in good condition. I just used this metal polish which was recommended just to clean up the journals, and then just use some acetone to clean up any residual polish. And when we're installing this, we've got some new thrust washers and also some new bearings. Even though the old ones were still in good condition, we might as well just replace these while we've got this out of the engine. So here I am installing the new bearings into the block, and before we do that we've got to remember to put the oil jets back in, and there's obviously 6 of those for each of the cylinders. So the upper bearings, as you can see, have got this groove for the oil, and before we install them I'm just going to use some acetone just to make sure there's no dirt or oil on those. And you can see that there's a little tab sticking out that goes into the notch into the block, which means that it will only go in one way. So yeah, once we've got that one installed, we'll come back when we've done the rest of them. And voila, here they all now installed. Now we can put the crank in. So with the crank installed, I now want to check the clearances on the new bearings, and to do that we're going to use some Plastigauge, and this just comes as some very thin strips of wax which you can place onto the journal, and then when you put the cap back on and tighten it down, it will then squish the wax, and then you can use the measurement guides to work out what your clearance is. So here I've got all of the caps installed, and all of these bolts have now been torqued up to the following. So yeah, once we've done that, we can loosen these, take the caps off and take some measurements. So with all the caps removed, we can use the measurement guide that comes with the plastic gauge, and we can check the clearances. And we're looking for between 0.02 and 0.06 millimeters for new bearings. So yeah, I'm going to go and measure all the clearances and make sure that they're all within spec. So with all the bearing clearances looking good, we can now move on to fitting the camshaft, and here's the old thrust washers, and I've bought some new ones. So these are slightly different to the originals. I think they come in two variations, and this one comes in two halves. I'm not quite sure which one's better, to be honest, but I'm going to go ahead and fit these new ones. So the lower ones go in here, and the upper ones, which have the tab, go on the bearing cap. So I've just put some assembly lube on the new bearings, ready for the crankshaft, and you can see I've put in the lower thrust washers. So here the crankshaft's now back in, so we can now put the main caps on with the new bearings, and you can see here I'm putting in the cap first that has the thrust washers. And you can see here that the little notch on the bearing lines up with the one that's on the other side, and we'll just carefully put that in, making sure not to disturb the thrust washers. And just to get it seated properly, just going to get a bit of wood and a hammer and just very gently tap it into position, making sure not to disturb anything. So all the caps are now installed in the correct order, using the numbers that are on each of them. And I've got some new bolts here, which we're going to use. And I'm just going to lightly oil each of these before they go in. So with the bolts torqued down but not angle tightened, we're just going to check the thrust washer by having a look at what the gap is. And here you can see we're just using a feeler gauge and just making sure it's not more than 0.3. But here, as you can see, it's around 0.1. So now we've done the final angle tightening on the bolts, 180 degrees, as you can see. And now we can give the crank a spin and make sure that it's all nice and smooth, which it is. So with that all done, we can now turn our attentions to the pistons. So we're going to start with the new piston rings, and we need to measure the ring gap. And we're going to use this tool that I designed. Put the link into the description. So you can see here's one of the rings, and the way the tool works is that you carefully put the ring into the cylinder. It's a bit tricky on this engine because the cylinders are angled, but we can then use this tool to help push the ring down to make sure it's properly seated and at the correct angle to the cylinder wall. And once we've done that, we can then get a feeler gauge and we can measure the ring gap and just double check that they are in spec, as you can see here. So we're looking for anywhere between 0.2 and 0.4. And as you can see, I've got 0.3 here, and that fits nicely. So we seem to be bang on the middle, so that's perfect. So I finished measuring all the gaps on the new rings, and I'm just making sure I keep all the rings together for each of the cylinders where I've measured them. As you can see, I've just written down what the gap is, just so I remember. So next up, we're going to get the pistons ready for installation. And here you can see the first piston, and we've got the rings here ready to go, all numbered up in order. And then we've also got a new set of standard bearings that we're going to fit. And then we have also a set of new bolts. And finally, we've got this tool which will hopefully make fitting the rings easier. So here's a time lapse of me installing the rings onto one of the pistons, and we'll start with the bottom one, which is the oil control ring. And you'll notice here that this one comes in 3 parts, and we can just carefully install this by hand, making sure not to twist or expand the ring too much. Also worth noting when you're installing the rings is that there's usually a marker that indicates the top of the ring, so just make sure you observe that when fitting them. So next is the second one, which is the oil scraper ring, and we just use the tool here to get that one on. And then finally we'll fit the top compression ring using the tool as well. And here I am just using some acetone just to clean up the bearing caps as well as the bearings themselves. So when fitting these bearings, you'll notice that they'll have a little location tag which will just help to make sure that they'll be fitted correctly, as you can see here. So we're now ready to install the pistons, and we're just going to give the cylinders a final clean with some acetone. And then we're going to take some fresh engine oil, and we're just going to lubricate the cylinder walls just to make sure that when we install the pistons, they go in nice and easy. So given the funny angle of the pistons in the VR6 engine, I've 3D printed this handy tool, which should hopefully make the process a lot easier. You notice here that the arrow lines the outside of the block. If we take a look at the piston as well, you'll see that that high side also corresponds with the outside of the block. And the super important thing to do is to make sure that all the gaps on the piston rings are correctly clocked, like on the diagram on the left. And here I'm just making sure that they are indeed correct before installing. And here we are ready to install the first piston, and I've got it within the tool, and now I'm just going to gently push down to try and get it to go into the cylinder. If that doesn't work, then you can use the wooden handle of a mallet and just gently tap it. If it really doesn't want to go, then it's worth probably taking it out and trying again, as you don't want to force this, otherwise you might damage the rings. But as you can see here, just doing some gentle tapping and it is slowly going in. So now I can just use my fingers and just push it in by hand all the way. So as I'm fitting new bearing caps, I've got some plastic gauge here so that we can measure the bearing clearances and just make sure they're in spec. So see here, I've just put the cap back on in the right direction based on the location tags, and then I'm going to use the original bolts in order just to tighten this up. And here on the screen you can see the initial tightening and final tightening of those bolts. So with the cap now removed, we can measure the clearance, and here you can see it's somewhere roughly between 0.04 and 0.05, so looks okay. So given I'm happy with the oil clearances, we can now go for final assembly. I'm just using this assembly lube on the journals and the bearing caps just to make sure it's all nicely lubricated when we go for the first start. So we'll put the cap back on, making sure it's the right way around based on the location tag. And here I've got new bolts which I'm going to tighten up with the tightening sequence on the screen. So with all the pistons finally installed, we now get the satisfaction of finally turning the engine over and just making sure it's not binding or anything like that. But this all feels nice and smooth, so it looks like we're good to proceed on to the next part of the build, which is installing the cylinder head. Right, so here's the new cylinder head gasket. Hopefully I ordered the right one, but looks okay to me. And conveniently also comes with a set of instructions which gives the tightening sequence, which will be important for later. But before we do that, we just need to make sure the surface is all nice and clean, and also that all of the bolt holes are clean as well. And here's the gasket now installed, just using the lugs on the top of the bottom of the block just to locate it. And now once I've given a final clean to the cylinder head, we can look to get the top and the bottom end back together. So here's the top and bottom end finally back together after many months. So now we can look to permanently get these two back together by installing the new cylinder head bolts. And here they are. You'll notice they come in two sizes, with the longer ones going into the middle, as you can see here. And then the bolts on the outside are slightly shorter, as you can see. But just before I'm going to install them, I'm just going to lightly oil them and then just get them in hand tight. So we can go for the tightening sequence now. And as you can see, all the bolts need to be tightened in a certain order, and there's 4 stages that we need to carry out each time. So yeah, just go and crack on with that. Here I've got my digital torque meter. I'm just going to dial it in so I can carry out the first 2 stages of this torque. You can see here. Once all those are done, we can go for the final tightening. As you can see here, I've marked all of the bolts up with Tipex, and I'm going to proceed with doing the first 90-degree turn and then do them all for the final 90 degrees. So next up, we're going to fit the timing chain, and to begin with, we need to get the crankshaft into TDC. So here you can see this tooth with the piece missing is aligned to the casing here, and if you look at the speed sensor ring, you'll see that the missing tooth is pointing downwards, which is letting us know that the crankshaft is now in TDC. So now we're ready to install the camshafts, and when we install these, we need to make sure that these are in TDC so that we don't end up with more bent valves when we come to tighten down the bearing caps. So in order to get it into time and to keep it in time, we're just going to use this 4mm piece of metal bar that just provides a cheaper alternative to the proper timing tool, but should do the same job. So with the camshafts lubed up and locked into position, we can now tighten up the bearing caps, making sure we do it in the correct sequence, as you can see here on the screen. This just makes sure that when we're tightening everything down, that it's not going to result in any of the camshafts getting warped. So next up, we're going to carefully install this timing chain housing, making sure that this strainer here at the back is empty, as I can get clogged with crap. And you can see here on the rings, I'm going to oil them and just make sure that all the gaps between the 3 are 120 degrees offset. So yeah, let's crack on and get that fitted. So here are the camshaft adjusters, and as you can see here, there's this little bit sticking out that needs to go into the center of those holes just to make sure it's in the correct position. So you'll know that you've got it correctly in place with the arrow here that's on the adjuster lines up with that notch on the timing chain housing. So the adjusters are now installed, and here I'm just making sure that the arrows on them line up to the notches that are on the timing chain housing. I've also used new bolts, and I've tightened them to the values on the screen, and you can use a 32mm spanner here just to hold everything in place while you're tightening up those bolts. So this is the intermediate shaft, and I just wanted to inspect this before I fit the new chain, and I'm just looking for any signs of wear and tear on this part of the oil pump drive. And you can see this piece here goes into the hole there and is used to drive the oil pump that sits at the bottom of the engine. I also wanted to check the intermediate shaft bearing, as you can see here, and I'm just looking for any obvious signs of damage. I can see some light scoring, but it doesn't look like it's anything too serious, so I'm happy to put this all back together, and then we can look to fit the new timing chains. And here's the timing chain kit we're going to use, which hopefully comes with all the parts we're going to need, including the guides, tensioners, and of course the chains themselves. So we're going to start by installing the lower timing chain, which goes on here. So here's the lower timing chain now installed. I'm just checking that the crankshaft is still in TDC, as you can see here, and also that the arrow on the intermediate sprocket is pointing at 12 o'clock. So here you're looking for all the slack to be on the right side of the chain where the tensioner goes. So with the tensioner now fitted, I'm just double checking that all the markings are lining up, which they do, as you can see here. Once we're happy with that, we can pull this pin out, which will then tension the lower timing chain. So with the camshaft still locked into place, I've installed the new timing chain, and here I'm just making sure that these copper coloured links are lining up to the arrows on the adjusters, which they do. And also if you come down to the intermediate sprocket, you can see here on the 3 copper coloured links at the middle lines up to that mark. So when you're installing this chain, you want to make sure that all of the slack is on the right hand side where the tensioner goes. So I'm now ready to try turning the engine over for the first time. So I've removed the tool for locking the camshafts and just making sure they're in the right position, and just double checking the chain. And in order to simulate the tensioner, I've just used some cable ties just to hold the tensioner in place. Otherwise it will jump out of time if you try and turn it over. So everything looks good, so yeah, let's try turning this over. And here's a quick time lapse of attempting to turn the engine over for the first time, and just making sure that everything feels okay, and we've got no issues with the timing jumping. So after that, we're just going to check that the engine's still in time, and we're just making sure that the arrows on the adjusters line up to the notches here. And also for the chain, we're going to make sure that there are 16 rollers in between the two. Note that the copper coloured links can no longer be used as a reference, as they've now moved, as you can see here. On the intermediate sprocket, also just making sure that the arrow here is pointing at 12 o'clock, which it does, and that also that the crankshaft is also at TDC, which you can see. So so far everything looks good with the timing. So now we're ready to fit the covers, and here's the front cover for the crankshaft, and as you can see, I've opted to put a new seal in, as it would seem silly not to replace it. And here it is all fitted. Next up is the lower timing chain cover, and again I've opted to put a new seal in, as if that one leaks then you're going to have big problems. Also, when fitting this, it's worth putting a blob of silicone on the cylinder head gasket here in the corners, just to make sure there aren't any leaks. And here's the upper timing chain cover, and I'll put new seals on those as well, and I'll install that once I've remembered to remove the cable tie. And just a word of warning, don't forget these two seals as well, like I did, otherwise again you'll be having big problems. And finally, we get to fit the new chain tensioner, which hopefully performs better than the previous one, which is what caused all of these problems in the first place. So before refitting the oil pump, I just wanted to give it a clean and make sure the strainer wasn't blocked, and also just have a quick look inside just to make sure there's no damage or deep scoring or anything like that that would cause a problem. You can see there is some light scoring on some of the parts, but doesn't seem to be anything serious, so I'm happy to put this back together and stick it back in the engine. In order to put it back together, it's quite straightforward, so there's only a few parts, as you can see here. And then there's just a couple of bolts holding it all together. And here's the oil pump refitted. And now we can finally refit the sump with a new bead of fresh sealant. Next up, I've given the oil filter and oil cooling housing a clean, which also doubles up as one of the engine mounts. So I'm just going to put new seals on here and just made sure there's no blockages or anything like that. And here we have a shiny new filter, which we'll probably use for a few hundred miles as we're running the engine in, and then give this thing another oil change. And here's the drive plate fitted, which I derusted with Evaporust. And with the engine at TDC, you can see some of the markings here which line up, which I didn't see before. And the bolts have been tightened using the tightening sequence that's on the screen. So here we have the crankshaft pulley fitted with a new bolt, and we've also gone and fitted a new water pump. So after many months and man hours, we finally got the engine all back together. And in the next episode, we're going to get this back into the car and give it its first starts to see if it actually works. So I hope you'll stick around for that. Thanks for watching.